Robert's first impression of the television was one of benign curiosity. A dull, boxy set covered in a layer of dust, its knobs and dials stiff with disuse, discovered at a small estate sale on the outskirts of town. The seller, a frail widow with fluttering hands, warned him that the TV possessed something malevolent. When he offered her $50, her face pinched with an odd mixture of relief and fear. She didn't haggle. Instead, she hurriedly stuffed his money into the front pocket of her apron and turned away, as though she couldn't bear to see him leave with it. He had acquired the piece more for its vintage charm than anything else. Robert, an avid collector of antiques, was always on the lookout for rare gems that he could restore or keep as conversation pieces. He loaded it into his trunk, brushing the dust off the worn wooden cabinet as he did. The drive home felt longer than usual, as if every mile were stretched by tension. He found himself glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something shift in the reflection of the old television in the back seat. Early the next morning, he set aside a few hours to examine his newest acquisition. He kept it in the garage, where he kept most untested antiques, before deciding how to display them. The television was heavier than it looked, and it took all his strength to hoist it onto his workbench. He pried open the back to check for damaged wiring or rust. The components looked ancient, but surprisingly intact. A deep wave of nostalgia washed over him at the sight of the dusty tubes and wires, reminiscent of a time when life could be paused by simply turning a knob. He plugged the set into a power strip, just to see if it still functioned. Initially, static shimmered across the small, curved screen. The knobs were creaky, each rotation accompanied by a subtle squeak. For a time, nothing but the crackle of white noise filled the speaker. He was about to give up, disappointed that he might need to invest in extensive repairs, when the static cleared with a faint pop. He expected an old-time show, maybe a rerun of a 1960s sci-fi sitcom. Instead, he saw an empty street corner, an odd camera angle that suggested the view was from the ground up, pointed at a brick wall. The picture was black and white, faint lines rolling across it. He turned the knobs again, hoping to catch a different station or a clearer signal, but the image remained. Eventually, he switched the TV off, resigned to the fact that he'd need professional help to get more than a static shot of a random street. But he didn't move the television. He left it on the workbench, feeling slightly unnerved without quite understanding why. The image had been harmless, just a street corner, but it carried an undercurrent of looming calamity. That night, in bed, Robert's mind churned with the possibility that some local broadcast station was testing a camera feed. He tried to puzzle it out. Could it be a live feed? Why black and white? At some point he drifted into an uneasy sleep. Hours later, he awakened to a dream-laced memory of the TV still plugged in. Something compelled him to check it. He didn't bother to put on slippers. With the house dark and silent, he padded gingerly to the garage, heart pounding so loudly in his chest that he could hear each thud echo in his ears. He flipped on the overhead fluorescent lights, illuminating the cluttered workbenches and tool rack. The television was on. He was certain he had turned it off, but there it was, screen glowing in the dim light, static hissing softly. A voice coiled through the air, low and distorted. He crept closer, trying to make out the words crackling through the speaker. Something about lost control, family, and fatal. An image replaced the static. A highway, cars zipping by. The camera held steady on one particular sedan in the middle lane. The sound was garbled, but Robert managed to make out the occasional phrase, "slick roads, didn't see, impact." Then came the sickening screech of tires. The sedan slid, twisted violently across the lanes. Other cars collided in a crumpled cascade of metal and sparks. The feed cut to static with an abrupt flicker, leaving Robert's pulse hammering. It took him several moments to compose himself. His rational mind insisted it was some old broadcast, maybe footage of a car accident from decades ago. But why would such footage show up as though it were happening in real time? Despite his better judgment, he kept watching, waiting for the feed or the voice to return. Eventually, fatigue won out, and he shut off the TV once more, unplugging it this time, before stumbling back to bed. The next morning, Robert felt a strange urgency nagging at him. He ignored his usual coffee routine and opened his laptop to read the morning news. There it was, on a local site. Multi-vehicle collision claims 2 lives on I-75. The article was posted only 15 minutes ago, stating that the cause was under investigation, though initial reports cited poor visibility due to wet roads. The accident sounded eerily similar to what the television had shown him, down to the screeching tires and the vehicle's positions. A shiver traced its way up his spine. Unnerved, he told himself it was an eerie coincidence. Maybe the battered old TV picked up a station that broadcast replays of accidents or cautionary videos. Yet the timing was too perfect. The estate sale widow's warning kept echoing in the back of his mind. Sipping coffee that tasted bitter from his own anxiety, he remembered her words. Malevolent. What if she knew? What if she had seen something similar? As the day progressed, Robert oscillated between rationalizing and being overcome by dread. Around noon, he grabbed his leather gloves and returned to the garage, determined to either figure this out logically or return the TV for a refund. But he doubted a refund was even on the table. The widow was probably grateful to have parted with the thing. He hooked it up again, half expecting static, half expecting some new horror. Minutes of fizzed white noise passed, then the screen jolted to life. This time the view was of a rundown neighborhood. Jagged fences, graffiti on the walls. In the distance, a figure limped along a cracked sidewalk. The viewpoint slowly panned as if guided by an unseen cameraman, then zoomed in on 3 men lurking near an abandoned lot, their faces partially obscured by hoodies. The scene remained still for a while, nothing but a sense of dreadful anticipation building. Suddenly, one of the men rushed forward, tackling a passerby. A flurry of violence exploded. Someone brandished a blade and the victim's screams were audible despite the distortion. Robert's stomach churned. He scrambled for the power button, but right then, a single line of text scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Wednesday, 7:12 p.m. He froze, staring in disbelief. It was Monday afternoon. If that timestamp were to be believed, this beating, or possibly worse, hadn't happened yet. His fingers trembled over the power button, and in his horror, he yanked the set's plug again, plunging the scene into darkness. He felt untethered, uncertain. Being witness to a crime before it took place was a burden he never imagined. He tried calling the police non-emergency line, but the conversation quickly turned awkward. He had no address, other than it looked like a rundown neighborhood. No perpetrator names or motives, just a cryptic, "It might happen on Wednesday evening." The dispatcher politely took his statement without any real conviction. When he hung up, Robert felt ridiculous and powerless. The following day, Robert paced between his living room and the garage, wrestling with a wave of restless anxiety. Duty called, so he spent most of the day in his home office, trying to block out the images. But by mid-afternoon, he couldn't stay away from the TV. If indeed it predicted tragedies, maybe there was a chance he could intervene in some meaningful way. He told himself that ignorance was worse. This time, anticipation gnawed at him as he plugged the television back in. Static at first, then a soft swirl of black and white shapes. After several agonizing moments, the channel cleared to reveal a dark stretch of country road, illuminated by a single streetlight. The text along the bottom read, Thursday, 2:10 a.m. Moths fluttered across the lamppost. The camera swiveled to show 2 huge trucks parked at the curb. Men in masks loaded crates onto the trucks with hurried efficiency. Something about the scene sent an electric jolt of alarm through Robert. They seemed almost militaristic. Without warning, a different angle cut in barrels full of a foul-looking chemical. The camera closed in on a label that read, flammable. Then the feed vanished into static. His heart pounded. He wondered what new disaster was set in motion for Thursday morning. Another flash of text blinked on the screen just before it cut off. Hazardous material stolen from local facility. Town threatened. Horrified, Robert unplugged the TV once more. He scrambled to call the authorities again, but the dispatcher insisted on more details. They asked for a location, any landmarks, or the name of the facility. Robert had none of that. He felt the same futility as before, trying to prevent a future he only vaguely understood. Too restless to eat dinner, he found himself replaying the violent images. He was just a collector, an ordinary man. How could he stop unknown criminals or warn some unsuspecting victim? The dread turned into a quiet obsession. He started scanning news websites, checking social media for any mention of suspicious shipments or break-ins. He found nothing about stolen chemicals or trucks, for the street attack supposedly set for Wednesday evening. He drove around rundown neighborhoods, hoping to spot something that might help him identify the location. But he was a needle lost in a city of haystacks. Fear overlay everything like an unshakable shadow. Wednesday arrived and Robert's nerves were frayed. Though practical sense told him he would magically stumble onto the exact location in an entire city, he still drove aimlessly through neglected streets, scanning for a trio of men that matched the TV's broadcast. Dusk bled into twilight, and twilight fell into darkness. He tried every old trick, playing loud music to stay awake, strong coffee to keep his vigilance, but all he achieved was an ever-mounting sense of futility. At 7:12 p.m., Robert was in his car, parked on a side street with the headlights off. He glanced at the clock and wondered if, at that very moment, someone was being ambushed and stabbed. Just the thought caused sweaty knots in his stomach. By 9 p.m., he still saw nothing. Eventually, he drove himself home in a silent, guilt-ridden haze. He felt helpless, like he'd failed some cosmic test. He stayed up all night, glued to local news feeds. It wasn't until just past midnight that a story popped up, person in critical condition after gang assault. No suspects identified. No arrests. They gave a location. It was across town from where he'd been searching. Robert shut his laptop in silent horror, mind teeming with the reality. The damn TV had shown him the crime exactly as it happened, and he'd done nothing effective to stop it. Over the next few days, nightmares plagued him. The set seemed to call him from the garage, a malevolent presence always lurking at the periphery of his consciousness. Finally, he capitulated to the compulsion and plugged it in once more, convinced he needed to see what else it had to show. But this time, the screen remained black. Anger and desperation surged. He fiddled with the knobs, even slapped the side of the cab. Nothing. Just the dull hum of electricity. He turned to leave. The moment he stepped away, however, a flicker lit the screen. The ghostly glow drew him back. A static-laden whisper. Robert. It pronounced his name with a hollow resonance that sent chills down his arms. He gaped at the screen. "Robert, are you watching?" said the distorted voice. He swallowed hard. His throat was dry, his heart thumping as though trying to break free from his chest. It was one thing for the TV to show future horrors, but to call him by name? He hesitated, then answered, voice trembling. "Yes, I am." As if responding to him, the voice asked, "Will you do nothing again?" Then the screen crackled to show a building Robert recognized, the public library, an architectural landmark downtown, with tall columns and a grand entrance. One frame cut to the silent reading room inside. Clocks on the wall read, Friday, 6 p.m. A small group of children sat in a circle, listening to a librarian read a book. Next came a shot of an arched window with a reflection of flickering light. Suddenly, an explosion tore through the scene. Fragments of glass and plaster rained down, cutting the image to static. He clenched the edge of the workbench, knuckles whitening. He couldn't just ignore this. Gathering his resolve, he forced himself to breathe and think. The footage implied the library would be bombed on Friday at 6 p.m. That gave him roughly 24 hours. Grim determination replaced his panic. He made up his mind that one way or another he would warn people, even if it meant humiliating himself by running into the library, falsely shouting about bombs. He began with the police again, pushing strenuously this time. He said he had credible evidence that a bomb might be planted at the library, though he still avoided mentioning a prophetic TV set. The officer promised to look into it, but Robert could hear the skepticism in their voice. After that, he called the library directly. The clerk who answered seemed polite but unconvinced, promising to pass the morning to their security staff. Unsure that he'd done enough, Robert resolved to show up in person. By 5:30 p.m. on Friday, he was pacing near the library entrance, sweat trickling down his back despite the brisk evening air. He scanned the area for anything suspicious: unattended backpacks, anxious faces, or unusual bulges under clothing. Time crawled forward. At 5:50 p.m., library employees started locking doors. Robert asked a guard about potential closures, and the guard explained that the police had asked them to close early as a precaution. Relieved that some measure of caution was being taken, Robert still felt anxious. He had no idea what might happen inside, or if he was just fueling an elaborate false alarm. At precisely 6 p.m., a jolt of adrenaline spiked through him, as though his own body had become a ticking clock. The library sat silent behind its locked doors, no explosion rippling out. 5 minutes passed, then 10. People on the sidewalk noticed him staring anxiously but kept their distance. Robert forced himself to breathe. He started to wonder if it was a hoax or some twisted broadcast meant to torment him. Then his phone buzzed. A news alert. Suspicious device found at public library. Bomb squad called. The device, discovered in a maintenance closet, turned out to be real. The bomb squad safely removed it, preventing a tragedy. Robert's pulse thundered with a mix of relief and horror. The TV's prediction had been right. This time, he had acted quickly enough to avert the disaster. That night, he slumped into the living room sofa, physically and emotionally exhausted. He wanted to celebrate preventing a tragedy, but all he felt was dread about what future broadcasts might come next. Everyone else was hailing the bomb squad and praising the police. No one knew that an old television set was the real reason lives were saved. At some point, sitting alone in the dim room, he convinced himself to rid his life of the cursed set. Let it torment someone else, or, better, no one at all. Perhaps he could destroy it, though part of him feared that might release some deeper evil. Ultimately, he decided to drive it to a secluded area, bury it, or smash it to bits. Just as he steeled himself to go back to the garage, the phone rang. It was an unknown caller. Robert leaned forward, heart pounding. He hesitated but answered. Static hissed in the background. Then a familiar, warped voice whispered, "I showed you the future so you could prevent suffering. Do you really think you can abandon your responsibility now?" Everything about that voice was unnatural, draining him of courage. It tapered off into laughter that was neither quite human nor mechanical, and the line went dead, leaving only a heavy silence. Sweating profusely, Robert slammed the phone back into its cradle. His initial impulse was to run outside, smash the television, and never look back. But a new wave of guilt arose. What if the set would show him another tragedy, something he could stop? Destroying it would doom innocent people. He could no longer think of the TV as an object. It was a burden, maybe even a calling. Driven by compulsive dread, he found himself once again in the garage, hooking the TV to its outlet. He could scarcely fathom the acts of heroism or terror that might follow. The screen flared to life just as he flipped the switch, revealing a grainy feed of a large warehouse, tall crates lined in rows. A flicker of text labeled it, "Tonight, 3 a.m." Guards patrolled in the background, armed and tense. A forklift rumbled. Shadows played across the screen as someone fiddled with a suspicious container. Robert leaned closer, bracing himself for whatever calamity was about to unfold. He hardly slept. Instead, he kept vigil, waiting for more details about the place, some distinctive sign or landmark. A partial address stuttered across the bottom in fuzzy letters, something like Riverton, Ind. Then static. Over and over, the broadcast repeated the same scene at the warehouse. The forklift moving, the guards out of sight, the suspicious container in view. At 2:45 a.m. he jolted awake from a half-doze, the TV flickering still. He watched the figures in the warehouse freeze, as though caught in a spotlight. Suddenly, an ear-splitting crack tore through the speakers, and the crates exploded in a ball of flame. The screen rattled with bursts of white noise, then the entire image collapsed into darkness. Wiping perspiration from his forehead, Robert stared at the blank screen. He made frantic calls to the local police, repeating the partial address, Riverton Industrial something. He tried the fire department, the local news tip line, any number he could think of. Each conversation ended with exasperated skepticism. Riverton Industrial was a broad area of factories and warehouses. The clock ticked. By 2:58 a.m. he was behind the wheel of his car, racing through the deserted streets. He had no plan, only a desperate hope that he might spot something from the broadcast. He plunged into an industrial area with looming factories, chain-linked fences, and blinking security lights. Anxiety ripped through him, especially given the labyrinth of roads. He glanced at the clock. 3:02 a.m. Too late? Or maybe the broadcast wasn't precise? He drove recklessly, scanning for any sign of activity. A forklift, crates, something suspicious. Sweat beaded on his face, and the haunting highlights of prior tragedies clouded his mind. Had he done enough? Finally, he spotted a pair of headlights behind a tall fence. Movement in the otherwise still darkness. He parked and hopped out. An unmarked gate stood slightly ajar, the lock jimmied loose. A forklift beeped somewhere within. Glancing around nervously, he slipped inside. His footsteps echoed on the concrete. Heart pounding, he turned a corner and came upon the site. Workers in plain clothes hurried around a series of stacked crates, guided by the forklift's dim headlight. There was something ominous about their haste. He cleared his throat, unsure how to proceed. Then one of them noticed him. In a flash, several men rushed forward, brandishing handguns. Robert threw up his arms in surrender. A suffocating fear gripped him. He almost regretted coming, but if the TV's broadcast was correct, something here was rigged to blow. "What are you doing here?" demanded one of them, eyes wild. Before Robert could answer, a faint ticking sound echoed from a crate. The men's expressions shifted instantly to alarm. One of them backed away, shouting, "You idiots, and it wasn't armed yet!" Another barked orders, "We gotta get out of here." The forklift operator panicked, knocking over a crate. Screams mingled with the screech of twisted metal as the forklift slammed into a tall stack, toppling them like dominoes. In the chaos, Robert dove behind a thick concrete pillar. All around him, the men fled. A deafening bang shattered the night, shaking the ground and sending splinters of metal whizzing through the air. Smoke and fire belched from the crates, flames lashing toward the ceiling. Robert's ears rang. He crouched low, pressing his trembling hands to his head. Time lost its meaning, replaced by the roar of the blaze and the crash of collapsing beams. At some point he became aware of blue and red lights flashing beyond the fence, sirens howling. Eventually, first responders poured in, securing the perimeter, dousing the flames. Robert slumped against the concrete pillar, dazed but alive. Someone led him away, shouting questions he couldn't hear over the ringing in his ears. As paramedics checked him, he managed to stammer something about a bomb. When he was finally able to gather himself, he realized the explosion had been severe, though seemingly less catastrophic than the broadcast predicted. Most of the men had escaped, but the site was in ruins. In the aftermath, after hours of questioning by suspicious authorities, Robert stumbled home under a veil of exhaustion and lingering terror. He slumped onto the couch, ignoring the lingering smoke smell on his clothes and the fact that dawnlight was beginning to creep through his windows. Eventually, he mustered the will to hobble to the garage. The TV was waiting for him, black screen reflecting his own hollow-eyed face. He stood there, torn between revulsion and a horrible sense of gratitude. With its help, he had prevented the worst disasters, at least partially, yet he also felt consumed, as if the cursed set had robbed him of peace. He switched on the overhead light. For a moment, the television's knob seemed to beckon. He imagined the next broadcast, the next tragedy before it struck. He inhaled slowly, remembering the estate sale widow's trembling expression. She had either been terrified by what she'd seen, or by what she understood this item to represent. The sense of responsibility weighed heavily. He realized he had crossed a threshold from which there was no easy retreat. Smashing the TV might offer momentary liberation, but would close a window into disasters no one else could see. The knob felt cold against his fingers. He stood motionless, reliving the horrors and fleeting triumphs. Slow, deliberate breaths filled the silence. Familiar static flitted across the screen in a faint swirl. He heard his name whispered again through the fuzz. He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them, setting his jaw with a resigned sense of duty. Hand on the knob, he resolved to discover what new terror loomed on the horizon, and to do whatever he could to prevent it. The brutal gift, this future broadcast, was now a part of his life. Even if it meant sacrificing his peace, he knew he would turn the knob again.